There is a moment, small, quiet, almost imperceptible, when a woman pulls her energy back from a man. Not her presence, not her words, not her physical body, her energy, and the entire axis of power shifts instantly. Most women don't realize the full magnitude of this extraction. They think they are simply stepping back, reclaiming their sanity, choosing peace. What they don't understand is that they have just committed the psychological equivalent of igniting a controlled detonation at the foundation of a man's sense of self. Because men, despite their posturing and bravado, run on a fuel so fragile it can barely withstand a breeze. Attention. Not love. Not commitment. Not connection. Attention. He doesn't realize how dependent he is on the emotional current you supply until you shut off the power grid. He thinks you are being dramatic, moody, irrational, until the silence stretches, until the warmth dissolves, until the man who once felt untouchable begins to sense the faint smell of decay around the edges of his ego. Your absence always arrives before his self-awareness, and that is why the obsession begins. You may notice this pattern in the wild. Men who once acted apathetic suddenly pacing the emotional floor, like addicts denied a fix. It is almost amusing, in a dark way, to watch a man who once treated you like a background noise suddenly behave as if you are oxygen being rationed. There is no faster way to expose the truth of a man's emotional structure than by withdrawing your energy. You will see whether there is a spine beneath the swagger, or whether the entire identity collapses like cheap architecture in a storm. Women often misunderstand this reaction. They think men become obsessed because they love them more, or because they finally see their worth, or because they realized what they've lost. Nonsense. Men become obsessed because their internal equilibrium has been disrupted. You removed the stabilizer they never thanked you for, and now they're wobbling through their own psyche like a drunk man trying to walk a straight line at a police checkpoint. Here's the irony. The obsession doesn't come from emotional depth, but emotional weakness. A man who is grounded, centered, or psychologically mature doesn't spiral when a woman pulls her energy back. He adjusts. He reflects. He modulates. But the average man, the one most women mistakenly entertain, has never developed these inner faculties. He survives off emotional outsourcing, relying on a woman's attention to regulate his self-esteem. When she withdraws, he loses his sense of place in the world. This is where the descent begins. Modern research even accidentally exposes this dynamic. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals with unstable self-worth experience heightened obsessive thinking when a perceived source of validation becomes inconsistent. They called it attachment anxiety, but let's call it what it truly is: dependency wearing a scientific disguise. The moment you pull away, his mind becomes a looping reel of intrusive thoughts, confusion, and panic. Not because you are his soulmate, but because you were his emotional crutch. And that's the unfiltered truth. Obsession is not a compliment. It is an indictment. Only a man who cannot self-regulate becomes unhinged when a woman stops feeding him. It's almost tragic. Almost. Watching him scramble to recreate an energy he never learned to generate internally. Men who cannot survive without constant emotional reinforcement resemble toddlers desperately searching the room for their mother. They call it passion. They call it desire. They call it love. You and I know better. It's dependency dressed up as intensity. There is something deeply comical about watching a man who once behaved like the prize suddenly panic at the thought of losing something he once refused to value properly. he becomes theatrical. He becomes creative. He becomes sentimental in ways that would win Oscars if sincerity were not such a glaringly absent ingredient. Men discover entire emotional vocabularies when they fear losing the woman they took for granted. Poets emerge from dust. Philosophers awaken. Sudden clarity reigns from the heavens. If only this enlightenment had arrived before the withdrawal of your energy. But men rarely think about the structure until the roof collapses. What fascinates me most is the sheer predictability of it all. A woman pulls back, and the same choreography repeats across cultures, ages, and personality types. At first he downplays it, pretends not to notice the shift. He assumes your energy will return on schedule, like an obedient dog. When it doesn't, irritation creeps in. He becomes passive-aggressive, cold, or performatively detached. When that fails, the irritation curdles into anxiety. Now he is checking your profile, rereading old messages, replaying arguments in his head, rewriting history so he doesn't have to face the reality that he pushed too far. And once anxiety fails, obsession enters like a final act. He begins behaving like the ghost of a man who once thought he had options. Suddenly the ego that strutted before you, like a rooster in full plumage, now quietly negotiates with consequences. The same man who once dismissed you now monitors you. The same man who claimed he didn't need you now studies you. The same man who once rationed his attention now throws it at you like loose change. It would be pathetic if it weren't so revealing. Simps are what prevent men from evolving. They are the chaos agents of the masculine world. Men who reward women simply for existing, who behave like emotional slot machines dispensing validation without standards, who cheapen the entire economy of attention with their desperation. They praise mediocrity, worship disinterest, and throw their dignity into the wind as willingly as gamblers throwing dice. These men ruin the ecology. They teach women that effort is optional and presence is enough. And worst of all, they lay the foundation for men who grow dependent on the attention of women, not the respect of them. But women who understand power dynamics, women who know how to control their emotional currency, are a different species entirely. They do not reward without reason. They do not entertain without purpose. They do not give energy unless the investment promises returns. When these women withdraw, it is never impulsive. It is never accidental. It is never a flinch of emotion. It is a strategic recalibration, and men feel it in their bones. Men call these women cold. Men call them difficult. Men call them dangerous. All synonyms for the same reality. They cannot be manipulated. And that terrifies men more than anything. Because the greatest fear a man has is not losing a woman. It is losing the power he imagined he had over her. You want to know why he becomes obsessed? Because when you withdraw your energy, you force him to confront the truth that every power he thought he possessed was an illusion you allowed him to believe. You remove the illusion, and he sees himself. That alone can create obsession strong enough to rewrite his entire behavioral pattern. What most people never grasp is that obsession is rarely about the woman herself. It is about the vacuum she creates when she retreats. Nature hates a vacuum, and insecure men fear it like death. The moment you withdraw, he feels the floor tilt beneath him. Suddenly, the emotional landscape he stood on so confidently begins to crack. Every assumption he made about you, about himself, about the dynamic, gone. The silence becomes a mirror, and he cannot escape the reflection. A man who believed he had you figured out now struggles to read the simplest cues. He once treated your affection like a subscription service, renewed automatically, at no cost, whether he deserved it or not. But you canceled the membership without warning. And men, for all their bravado, are notoriously terrible at handling emotional cancellations. They panic, they theorize, they catastrophize. They build entire conspiracy boards in their minds, trying to decode a woman who is no longer broadcasting. It is the uncertainty that breeds obsession. Uncertainty is the most potent psychological stimulant known to human relationships. Casinos, cults, and troubled romances all run on the same combustible fuel. Men crave predictability in the world, but unpredictability in women. They think it makes them feel alive. But when that unpredictability threatens their emotional supply instead of enhancing it, they begin to short-circuit. It's almost poetic, watching masculine ego crumble under the weight of its own expectations. And here's where the story turns darker, more revealing. Men don't simply miss you when you withdraw. They miss the version of themselves they got to be in your presence. The confident one, the desired one, the man who mattered. You think he's obsessed with you. He's obsessed with how he felt when you were feeding him. Now that you've stopped, he feels like a downgraded version of himself. And humans, by nature, fight tooth and nail to get back to any state where they once felt significant. To lose you is to lose the reflection that made him feel inflated. So he returns, not as a man reborn, but as a ghost, haunting the remnants of his old importance. What you must understand is that obsession is not driven by clarity, but by confusion. The more confused he becomes, the more obsessive he grows. This is why men who once acted indifferent suddenly become detectives worthy of a noir film, lurking in digital shadows, tracking timestamps, noticing the details they once ignored with Olympian apathy. He begins to see threats where none exist. He analyzes who you might be talking to, who you might be entertaining, and worst of all, who might be replacing him. Replacement is the male apocalypse. Men can handle rejection if no one else wants you. They can handle distance if they believe you're alone. But the moment they suspect another man has entered the frame, their bones turn to dust. The male ego is fragile enough on a good day, but the thought of being replaced activates an ancient panic, the kind that predates language, the kind embedded in evolutionary coding. Men fear replacement because it strips them not of love, but of legacy. And the irony? You don't even have to be entertaining anyone else. The suspicion alone is enough to set his imagination on fire. His paranoia becomes your poetry. Women with high emotional intelligence understand this instinctively. They do not weaponize it. They simply refuse to manage his emotional chaos for him. They let the silence do the work. Silence is a strategist. Withdrawal is a sculptor. Distance reveals architecture. When you stop pouring energy into a man, he is forced to confront the structural weaknesses he's spent years ignoring. It is an involuntary self-examination. And this is where the obsession morphs into something more humiliating. The performance. Men who once prided themselves on not chasing suddenly run marathons. The detached ones start sending paragraphs. The emotionally unavailable ones start confessing. The stoic ones become poets of desperation. The funniest transformation occurs in the men who once preached focusing on themselves, because now their entire focus is you. They orbit you like a planet around a dying star, hoping your gravity returns. The desperation is almost tender, if it weren't so comically self-inflicted. What women rarely see is that men do not chase women. They chase relief. He doesn't want you. He wants the end of the discomfort. He wants the return of the emotional analgesic you provided. You were his equilibrium, his soothing agent, his psychological thermostat. Remove that, and he becomes feverish. But something far more interesting happens when you don't return, when you stay detached, when your energy doesn't flow back to him despite his theatrics. Eventually, his panic transforms into self-reflection, but only when every manipulation, every plea, every angry outburst has failed. Only when he realizes that nothing he says or does can pull you back onto the stage you once shared. This is when he begins to reconstruct himself, not because he wants to be better, but because he wants to regain access. Growth born out of desperation is still growth, but it's the kind that tastes like ashes. He becomes disciplined. He becomes attentive. He becomes intentional. But the tragedy is that these changes arrive too late, like flowers placed on a grave instead of in a lover's hands. You may wonder why I speak about this with such cold amusement. It's because these patterns repeat with mathematical precision. Human nature is predictable. Power dynamics even more so. People like to believe they are complex, mysterious, unique creatures navigating love and relationships with free will. In reality, they are puppets on the strings of their own psychology. And nowhere is this more glaring than when attachment meets withdrawal. The women who know this, truly know it, become untouchable. Not emotionally detached, not heartless, not masculine, as insecure men like to label them. Simply untouchable because they understand the economy of energy. They understand the value of their emotional presence. They understand that when they withdraw, the entire dynamic rearranges itself around their absence. These women are not cruel. They are precise. They do not pull away out of malice, but out of mathematics. They give where there is reciprocity. They retreat where there is depletion. They do not invest in men who treat them like accessories. And men, in their clumsy attempts to maintain dominance, often fail to see that the power they wish to hold must first be earned. But the real mastery lies in neutrality, withdrawal without theatrics, distance without bitterness, silence without the need to announce it. Nothing destabilizes a man more than a woman who simply stops reacting. Emotional chaos thrives on participation. When you stop participating, the chaos suffocates, and he spirals. You can see it in their behavior, the overcompensation, the sudden declarations, the strange mix of arrogance and pleading that only insecure men can pull off. They become like gamblers chasing losses. The more energy they wasted, the more they want to reclaim. Not because the prize is valuable, but because the loss feels like an insult. This is obsession in its purest form, the desperate attempt to reverse humiliation. Now, before we go further, I'll say this. If you're listening and something in this dynamic feels uncomfortably familiar, if you find yourself repeating the same patterns, attracting the same emotionally dependent men, losing your power the moment you become invested, then you may need guidance tailored to your specific situation. This is why I offer one-on-one coaching, not to coddle you, not to inflate your ego, but to give you clarity, precision, a psychological map of your own tendencies so you stop walking into power imbalances blindfolded. The benefits of one-on-one coaching are simple: faster insight, sharper strategy, and someone who can see the patterns you cannot. You bring your situation. I dissect it. You walk away with understanding, not confusion. And in the realm of relationships, understanding is leverage. My landing page is finished. I'll be adding it to the description and pinning it in the comment section. Go there. Read the free PDF. Watch the free video breakdown. And if you're serious about mastering this game, not stumbling through it, subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get deeper breakdowns I can't share publicly. And for those who want to go even further, you can now pre-order The Feminine Game, my platform, where I'll be releasing full courses, dissecting psychology, dynamics, leverage, and the art of influence in relationships. There's a truth most people choke on before they ever swallow it. When you withdraw your energy, you expose the hierarchy of need, not the hierarchy of desire, not the hierarchy of attraction. Need. And need is the strongest force in human psychology. Need shapes behavior with far more precision than love ever could. Love inspires poetry. Need inspires obsession. Love is emotional. Need is existential. And when a man feels that the source of his emotional regulation is slipping through his fingers, he feels a primitive kind of dread. Humans are terrified of losing whatever stabilizes them, even if that stabilizer was something they didn't appreciate while they had it. It's the same instinct that causes people to mourn habits they once despised. The moment something becomes familiar, the psyche clings to it like a life raft. When you pull your energy back, you're not just removing affection, you're removing familiarity. You're turning the lights out in a room where he never learned the layout. And so he stumbles. It's almost elegant, the way chaos reveals character. Watch closely, and you'll see the mask peel off. The man who once acted unbothered suddenly shows aggression. The one who acted superior suddenly begs for reassurance. The one who acted emotionally unavailable suddenly becomes clingy. Withdrawal doesn't create obsession. It reveals it. Men who were never stable in the first place simply implode faster. There's a certain dark humor in watching a man insist he was never that into you, while simultaneously losing sleep over why you haven't contacted him. Humans are the only species capable of lying to themselves with full conviction while accidentally exposing the truth through behavior. A man will swear up and down that he's fine, that he's moved on, that he's unbothered, yet his search history begins to look like a teenager's after a breakup. He checks your online status, your uploads, your comments. He starts interpreting your silence like scripture, convinced every lack of response is a coded message written specifically for him. And no, he won't admit it. Men would rather confess to tax fraud than to emotional dependence. If you want to understand why your withdrawal destabilizes him so deeply, you must understand the fragile ecosystem he lives in. His ego. The male ego is a museum of curated illusions, fragile exhibits held together with duct tape and optimism. As long as you're pouring energy into him, the museum feels grand, impressive, admired. But take away the attention, and the dust becomes visible. The cracks appear. The lights flicker. Suddenly he's forced to face the reality that the grand representation of himself only existed because you kept reinforcing it. You didn't just give energy, you gave him identity. This is why men become enraged when a woman disengages. This is why they lash out, why they accuse you of disrespect, why they suddenly become moral philosophers preaching loyalty, consistency, effort. They're not upset because you pulled back. They're upset because you stopped validating the fiction. You stepped out of your supporting role in their self-narrative, and now they don't know how to write the next chapter without you. Withdrawal is exposure. It reveals how much he depends on you to maintain the storyline he crafted. A man with a strong internal world, with stable self-worth, doesn't collapse when a woman pulls away. He adjusts. He respects the boundary. He reflects. But the typical man? He turns into a malfunctioning algorithm, repeating old tactics that no longer work, hoping one will restore the connection. This is why you see such a bizarre range of behavior. Anger one day, romance the next, indifference the day after. He's running through emotional costumes trying to find the one that compels you to return. He thinks there must be a combination of words, a specific tone, a strategic confession that will bring your energy back. He doesn't realize that the moment he lost access was the moment he stopped valuing the access he had. Women who understand this dynamic and wield it without apology often carry a kind of quiet power. They don't flaunt it. They don't weaponize it. They simply understand the value of their emotional presence and refuse to bankrupt themselves on men who think attention is a birthright. These women are the ones men call mysterious, difficult, dangerous. What they really mean is, she cannot be controlled through ego games. And nothing infuriates insecure men more than a woman who does not need their validation. But let's talk about the part most people never mention. Not every woman's withdrawal creates obsession. Only the women whose energy actually mattered to him. If your presence fed him, your absence starves him. If your energy inflated him, your silence deflates him. Men forget that emotional investment is reversible. They get so used to being fed that they assume the kitchen never closes. Then one day, it does. And suddenly, he realizes he never learned how to cook. There's a particular moment, usually after the third or fourth ignored message, when his desperation becomes subtle. He won't text you paragraphs anymore. He won't try dramatic arguments. He won't even pretend to be angry. Instead, he'll try to become the version of himself he thinks will lure you back. He'll mirror what once worked. He'll soften his tone. He'll feign emotional awareness. He'll perform empathy like a theater student auditioning for a role he knows he isn't qualified for. He isn't transforming. He's reenacting. This performance is the final stage of male obsession. The attempt to rebuild the bridge without understanding why it collapsed. You'll see him trying to retrace steps, reconstructing memories, analyzing moments. He'll remember conversations you forgot ever happened. He'll recall details he ignored the first time. He'll try to mimic the emotional intelligence he thinks you want. But mimicry is always obvious to women who pay attention. You can tell the difference between a man who grew and a man who's panicking. He becomes like a thief, trying to pick a lock he once had the key to. And this is where your true leverage emerges. Not in playing hard to get, not in punishing him, not in manipulating. Your leverage lies in being the type of woman whose energy is valuable in the first place. The kind whose presence amplifies a man's life rather than fills a void. The kind whose withdrawal destabilizes because your presence stabilized. It's not about being cold. It's about being consequential. This is where I'll tell you something most dating experts are too cowardly to say. If your energy did nothing for him, your withdrawal will do nothing to him. Men don't become obsessed with absence. They become obsessed with the loss of something that once benefited them. If you were simply convenient, he won't spiral. If you were irreplaceable, he'll unravel. And you know what determines whether you were convenient or irreplaceable? Your standards, your self-possession, your emotional discipline, the way you move through the world with a sense of internal gravity. The kind of woman who knows that presence is currency and invests accordingly. If you're listening and realizing you don't fully understand how to embody that level of self-possession, or how to build a dynamic where your energy is valued instead of drained, this is exactly why I coach. One-on-one conversations reveal patterns you can't see alone. They show you where your boundaries leak, where your instincts misfire, where your emotional investments sabotage your own leverage. In a single session, I can dissect the dynamic you're trapped in, map out the psychological terrain of the man you're dealing with, and show you exactly where your power is bleeding out. It's not therapy. It's not cheerleading. It's strategy. And every woman who has worked with me walks away with a level of clarity she didn't know she was missing. The landing page is up. I'll pin it in the comments section and add it in the description. Go read the free PDF. Watch the video I left there. And if you want deeper, consistent insights, subscribe to the newsletter. That's where I break down the mechanics of these dynamics in ways too sharp, too honest, too unfiltered for public platforms. And don't forget to pre-order The Feminine Game. The course platform will take everything I'm explaining here and break it down into frameworks, case studies, psychological strategies, and influence dynamics. If you've ever wished someone would just hand you the playbook instead of vague motivational nonsense, this is it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what was the moment you realized a man became more obsessed the second you pulled away?